Hello, welcome back to Diagonal Move, and we are now approaching the first winter turn of the year 30 BCE. It's actually going to be the only winter turn of the year because we finished the game in October, November of this year. So that means this is the final video in this series and the final turn of this game, or the final round of this game. Perhaps it's a better way to describe it. From the end of the previous year, the Western Empire is now ravaged by plague, with a fair number of their units having plague, including Octavian's detachment there, which did have plague at the end of the previous video. I just had muddled the plague counter up amongst the rest of the counters in the stack. We also have that interesting, I'll just have to move the camera over to show you, but we do have that interesting position with the prestige just there, where both players are some way off from the 0 prestige that they need to force upon the other player in order to win. And I think the reason for that is the defection rounds of the Western player have primarily been focused on provinces or these regions in an attempt to minimise the amount of resources that the blue player has, because they have far more resources than the Western player, and that's been only middlingly successful. The Western side have taken a Chia off the blue player, and they also attempted a few other sites as well, and they've either failed or they ended up being rebellions and defections that happened in places that didn't give resources, like Thrace and Medea, just here on the far right hand side. So only middling success really. But now that we move into this turn, I think we really need to focus the efforts of the Western player on forcing those defections on troop units, because they give the strength point losses, which will be what you need to inflict in order to move that blue counter down the prestige track. There is also the possibility here of attacking Alexandria. That still exists. There is still a strength point advantage to the Western player. However, with the fortress bonus, because underneath the stack is a fortress, in defence that gives a 3+ to the strength of the people occupying it. So that means that it's much more of a one-to-one fight, and numbers in this game are quite harsh on both sides, and you really don't want to inflict unnecessary losses on yourself if you can avoid it in a combat. So what to do down here is quite an interesting puzzle, because we can't inflict defections on Alexandria or on the province of Egyptus if we were trying to take the province. So we do have to do that in a good old-fashioned siege warfare type style. In terms of the navies, Agrippa's all the way up here, having retreated from the threat of being attacked there by the squadrons, so they're quite out of the way. There is a transport unit about to come on for the Western player, but I'm not entirely sure how that's going to help at this point. You need to place these transport units on 2 turns ahead, on at least a turn ahead, depending on the unit type. And now that we've reached this turn of this new year, it's difficult to see how the transport's going to help, given that most of the units are up here, and it will take at least a couple of turns to get down here. Now the Eastern player, what are they going to do? Because they can only win if they have higher prestige, and if they don't force a 0 prestige status on the other side, any other result basically is a draw. You have to get a 0 prestige to win, inflict a 0 prestige to win, or you have to have higher prestige and occupy the opponent's capital. The opponent's capital being Rome. So the Eastern Roman Empire have a real challenge on their hands now. They've been defensive for quite a while. They were put very much on the back foot from very early in the game. Had some defections up in the north of Italy just here, which really put a dampener on their attempts to take Rome. But we'll have to see how that goes. But I think the blue player is going to have to be far more proactive in trying to inflict those losses on the Western player, because the player with the most prestige is the only one that can perform those defection attempts, which means in theory, I think the Western player should have a distinct advantage here, but we'll have to see how it goes. Anyway, I've talked enough. Let me get cracking, and I'll come back and have a look at how the year is going shortly. June of 30 BCE has drawn to a close, and with it has come the end of the civil war between Mark Antony and Octavian. It was really a slow death process for Mark Antony's forces. Right from the get-go, there was some defections. The forces of Cleopatra, the squadrons, the navies of Cleopatra, all deserted during the January turn of this year, which is the very, very first turn of the year. A month later, the forces that were stationed off Cyprus also defected. Again, the squadrons, and basically the entire combat arm of the Eastern Navy defected by the end of March. From there, it wasn't long before the Western player was able to get some forces across the sea here. Only just mind, there was a little bit touch and go with the storms, and then reinforce Octavian, who spent a couple of turns or 4 months, say, in representative time, besieging Alexandria again, constantly attacking, and eventually did force a complete prestige loss on Mark Antony, meaning the game has ended, and we will not be playing out any more turns. The game ends immediately that the that one player reaches 0. It's been a really interesting campaign. There's the slow beginning in 32 BCE with lots of forces they were moving around, jockeying for position. There was the siege on Rome up in the northwestern part, eastern part of the map here, and that was really perhaps the beginning of the end for Antony's side, because those experienced legions, they besieged Rome, they contracted plague, were forced back, maybe not necessarily in that order, but they were forced back. They were combat weary, they were riddled with disease, and they thought, no, let's do something else. And off they went. They all defected, and losing experienced legions like that was probably a tactical mistake or a strategic mistake on my side, playing as the Eastern player. Probably wouldn't do that again, but it was certainly made for an interesting story point of the game. Octavian down the bottom here seems to have spent most of the game back and forth in the desert. The war of attrition between Agrippa and Cleopatra along the coastline here has been very interesting, but really, once the balance had been tipped in the direction of the Western player, something tells me it was only really a matter of time before Antony did finally have to surrender. Okay, that is then the end of the playthrough. The end of my session reports, should I say, my end of my campaign game. I think what I will do is I will stop the video here for this one, and then collect my thoughts together and do a proper review, because this is a very interesting game that I think warrants a video on its own, but we shall see. Okay, that's it for this video. Thank you for joining me once again. I hope you've enjoyed this series of session reports for Antony and Cleopatra. If you do like the video, please click like and subscribe if you haven't already, all that sort of thing, and I will see you next time.